to turn it over to Linda.
Yeah, first I want to thank ECLIS for inviting me to speak, so it's good. And so I was thinking about being here on the 4th of January and wondering if people were even, you get back to work and you're like trying to remember what the heck your job is, right? That's always what it was for me because you're off for so long. So are you guys back in the saddle now? You ready to go? Right.
There you go.
So I know we have a lot of people talk about leadership and personal leadership and things like that here. I tend to be a little bit more tactical about things like, here's some tools. That tends to be my vibe. And so I'm bringing sort of that kind of thing here today. When I go out to clients, I work with a lot of small businesses, and I tend to hear two common things that people ask me as soon as I get there. One is how to give good feedback to people. They might frame that in a different way of saying, like, I tell them and I tell them and I tell them and they're not doing what I said. That to me means I need to learn how to give effective feedback. And the second one is, I just don't know how to delegate. Delegating is so hard. So I'm choosing to talk about delegation today because I think that there are ways that you can learn to break this down and make it easier for yourself. But is anybody here have a problem they feel like with delegating? Sandy says yes. Everybody's got this locked? Well, maybe I can still teach you something new. Some of you might not have employees to delegate to, but you are being delegated to, okay? And sometimes you might feel frustration about how that works and how that's happening. And maybe some of the things that I talk about today will help you see a key like, oh, this is why we're not quite meeting here together and why this tends to be a little bit frustrating. So hopefully you'll learn something you can put in your pocket and take home with you and take back to your workplace and make this better. I put here on my slide, is it me or is it them? Well, if you look at any of the stuff that I present, you know that I'm a big one on personal responsibility because I really, really feel like the only person that you can truly impact is you and how you show up. So I'm going to say it's you, okay? It's on you to take the initiative, to take the actions to make it something different. So in my world, it's always you. So what stops us from delegating, right? So sometimes we get overloaded and we feel that. Well, there's things that are real barriers, and then there's things that we create ourselves. So what we tell ourselves about delegating, why we don't do it, it's just easier if I do it myself, okay? I'm just gonna do it myself. If I ask them to do it, it's gonna take me forever, I have to train them. That's a real thing. So first thing I would tell you is delegating is an investment in your team, right? So if you wanna be able to delegate, you have to spend some time training them. The second thing we tell ourselves is, they just can't possibly do it as well as I can. Well, I would just point out that you couldn't do it as good as you can now the first day you did it either, right? So again, people need to learn, and they are gonna start out with being fairly incompetent until you put the investment and they have the time to gain the skill. So it's a true thing, but it's a barrier that you're creating. I don't have anybody available to do it. Now this is probably actually one of the harder things to overcome because you really might not have anybody to give it to. So that if you are maxed out and you have to delegate something, you're gonna have to get creative about that. First of all, do you really not have anybody to delegate to? Are you underestimating the ability of your team and the ability for them to actually take on things that you might not think they're capable of? Because people are pretty smart. Second of all, does it need to be done within your team? Can you outsource it? Can you hire a freelancer? If you're not good at graphic artists, there's Fiverr, right? There's lots of people that are good at graphic arts that you can hire a freelancer to help you do that. And the third thing is, some of your tasks might be very difficult to delegate, but if you broke them down into the components of that task, there might be some parts of it that you could delegate. For example, I have to run a report from the system and then I analyze something. Well, they might not be able to analyze it, but they might be able to run the report and make sure it's ready for you, and that saves you time, right? So you have to get creative sometimes about where the capacity might be for you to delegate. But sometimes we're not very honest with ourselves about why we don't delegate, right? Sometimes we just don't want to give up the task. So why might that be? Because if we're really good at something, it's a comfort zone. So when we feel stressed or we need a mental break or whatever, we might go take refuge in that task, right? We might go do that because it's just easy for me and I can decompress. There's some value in that, but what is the value in that versus the other things that you could be doing that are more high value add to the organization? The second thing is you don't trust anybody. Well, that's interesting, right? So that means that you're the only one in the world that could do that at that level of quality. Doesn't sound very humble, does it? And you create trust in the person's ability to do it by investing in them. So if you're just like, nobody can do this as good as me, I think you need to maybe check your attitude a little bit about that. And it's creating a barrier. Is it worth it? And also we do tasks out of habit. I had a client, the CFO, for some reason, developed over time that he would go and pick up the mail from the post office box every day. And he just did that every day. It was just a habit, and it took a lot of time. But he just never thought about, I can change this habit, right? So some of the things that make delegating hard are real things that need investment, and some of them are barriers that we create in our own minds. Make sense? Can anybody relate to any of these that I have here? Yeah, I think the comfort zone one is probably was the biggest one for me. I just enjoy doing this. I can go retreat into this, and I don't have to do something hard. But what we have to think about is what we're losing when we aren't able to delegate. And it's a lot, right? First of all, you're operating under your value to the organization. What's that $1,000 an hour value thing that you aren't doing because you're getting the mail, right? What's that only you can do thing that you're not doing? There's a high level of value there as an entrepreneur or a leader to what you can do, and you might be spending it on low value activities. You're making life harder for yourself. A lot of times when I talk to leaders and they're at this, I just can't delegate, I don't know how to delegate, or it's an issue for me. They're at their max, right? Their life is really hard for them in the moment. And so they're feeling the impact of not being able to delegate. So when you do that, you increase your stress, you risk burnout, right? And then that's really bad for the organization. And you're honestly limiting your organization's ability to grow. We have a span of control that we can have. And if we don't find a way to expand that span of control, we can't find a way to expand our business. So we have to find a way to be able to give people things to do so that more things can be done in the organization. And also, and to me, one of the most important things after leading for many years is you're really not allowing your team to realize their potential, right? Folks have lots of wonderful capabilities and potentials within them. And when we don't give them the chance to try new things, to start out at the incompetent and move to the competent, we're kind of robbing them of the ability to grow. And so I think that's almost, as a leader, one of the most important things about not delegating. So really what you're risking is your organization's future, because when it's just you, there's no ability to grow or satisfy more customers, et cetera. So how do we know when it's time to delegate? First of all, if you are working really, really hard and you're there till 6 o'clock at night and you're completely stressed out and your team is skying out at 4:30, it's probably time to delegate, okay? Now, there's something to showing a work ethic, and that's a good thing, right? We want to show what it means, but if you're teaching the work ethic lesson and nobody's learning it, there's a problem. So you need to reevaluate at that point. Does anybody ever has that happen to them and their team? Okay, good for you guys. When you have hit the ceiling on where you can contribute. So I worked with a client that they were growing very, very rapidly as a business, and it was going well a lot on the leader's energy, right? And that person was creating something pretty magic, but they recognized they were at their max. They just had no more hours in the day, and that they knew how to delegate, but they were having a hard time with it in their new business. And so they knew, like, I cannot grow this business unless I figure out how to take some of this work and shift it around in the organization. So when you are the ceiling for growth in your organization, and again, when I talked about using your team, and when you are not using your team to the fullest, when you are not understanding the capability of each individual and kind of pushing them to their next level, then it's probably time to delegate. I mean, even if you're not growing, we want our people to grow, right? So where do you start? So people say, oh, it's so hard to delegate. I think because we're not very analytical about it. I think if you get a little bit analytical about delegating and trying to break it down into patterns, it becomes a lot easier. So I have a couple of tools here to teach you to break it down so you can see it in a different way. First of all, understand that there are different kinds of delegation. And I have this defined here in levels. It's a continuum, so there's going to be more nuance to this than what I'm listing here, but I'll give you the idea. So the first level is level 1, and that is I'm delegating a task, and I want you to do this exactly like I'm telling you to do it. And here are the steps. Run this report, make this phone call, etc. Now, this can be a very, very legitimate thing. First of all, if somebody is really incompetent, and that's not to put the person down, but to say they have no experience at all, they need this step-to-step thing. Also, even if the person has some capability, if you have a system that needs supported in a certain way, in a very specific way, like I need data entered in exactly like this, or I need something to happen in my system exactly like this, you need it. And also when there is a customer for the output of that process. So that customer is, and that I don't mean necessarily external customer, but there's a person who's receiving the output from that process, and it needs to look a certain way for them to do their job, right? That is the time to do level 1 delegation and tell the person exactly how you want them to do this job. And if you have to do this, I say, if you want a specific result, give specific instructions. You need to be very detailed. I'd say write it down or sit and talk to them and watch them write it down. Because if you don't, they're not going to do what you're expecting, right? And a very important thing in delegation is to know what success looks like, right? So if success is do this exactly like I'm telling you, then you need to make sure that they get very specific instructions. Make sense? The second level is level 2. So this is where you have a task and it can be modified, but you want to approve it, or alternatively, you want to know that they changed it, okay? So this is where somebody starts to gain competence in the task, and they might have a better idea about how to do it. So then how you told them to do it. So a level 1 example would be payables. Maybe you're doing payables in your organization and you want, run this report, anybody that's over 30 days past due, make this phone call. If they don't, send an email. If they don't respond to that, make a phone call. You know, so you have this like very structured process. But maybe somebody's doing that a while and they say, oh no, you know what, I think this works a little better. I make the phone call first, then maybe the email, and then maybe if you would get involved. So they want to modify the process, but you want to know about it. Okay, so that allows people some freedom for their own thoughts, improvements, because unless you think you can do it, you have the best ideas ever. Usually people can always improve on what you're doing, and you want them to own it. So having ability to have input into it is important. So that's level 2. You need to understand what you're expecting when you delegate, right? Because if you don't get this right, people are going to feel gotcha'd, right? Because they're going to expect one thing and you expect something else, and there's going to be a mismatch, and then there's going to be conflict there. So level 3 is when somebody is When you are just holding somebody responsible for the result of a process, right? Or whatever it is. I talk a lot in processes because I came from manufacturing, and so I think that way. But the result of whatever the activity is that you're doing. So for example, with the payables, maybe you just hire somebody in and or you have a partner in the business and you're handing it off and you're just like, hey, you know what? I want payables to be 33 days on average. That's what I want them to be. Go figure it out. Maybe you give them a few tools or whatever, and you just hold them accountable to that result. So they have full creativity to figure out how they're going to do that, right? That's level 3 delegation, and that works great too. The issue here, though, is it still requires work from you because, first of all, you have to know what success looks like. Second of all, you need to have a way to check in, and you need a way to see, are they successful? So on that particular example, you need a way to see, what are my payables days? And are they meeting that, or do they need support from me? Make sense? So somebody here have level 3 delegation given to them? Go figure it out. Yeah, Jordan says yes. I always try to get folks to level 3 delegation because it's easier for me, right? They can go do their thing, and plus I think people are really smart and they're smarter than me. And so if I kind of let them figure it out, you gotta be careful though, because you don't want people to feel abandoned, right? Or micromanaged. So this is why this is really important to kind of figure out, where am I at on the level here of how I'm delegating, and do that person and I understand this? Do we agree on it? Do we understand it? Make sense? Okay, does somebody feel like in their organization they see this not happening as good as it could and there's some confusion? No? I see a little maybe over here. Okay. So again, trying to break this down, get a little more analytical so we can get it right and have a way to think about it. I have some key questions. Yes?
So, sorry I didn't jump in on this, but back to the last one. What if you're in an environment where you're trying to do something new? You don't have the skill set necessary, but you need somebody to go figure that out and make that happen. What are your recommendations when you're trying to empower people to create solutions and deliver on a delegated task or responsibility that maybe you don't know how to guide them into, but it's something new or something different that you're trying to do as an entity?
So the quick answer is you have to have a why. Okay, you have to have a vision for where you're trying to go, and you have to have some idea about how this supports the vision. Right? So once you can describe, like, I'm trying to, for your case, launch a new law office in this area, and you say to Jordan, go figure that out. But you have to have a vision for what you're trying to create as a business. Then the person can go figure it out. If they don't understand the plan, what are they even aiming at, right? So it has to have some kind of form around it, whether it's a payables days to 33 or hey, I think we want to grow the business in these kind of areas. I think you have to have some kind of, it can't be completely open, right? Or what are they going to go work on? Make sense?
Yeah.
Good question. So key questions to help you break down what you're trying to delegate to understand how to tackle this. Now, a lot of times when I go to clients, they're completely overwhelmed, right? And they have no idea where to even start, and they just feel like some of these earlier questions, nobody can do it as good as me, and how do I even have time to do this? And that's kind of where they're at. So this helps them think through, how do I start, right? Because we need to create a little space, right? A little capacity so that we can do this deeper investment on the higher level tasks, right? So the first question is, how hard is this to train? Like, can I do this in 10 minutes or 10 years? You know what I mean? Like, how long is this going to take to train? Now, if you don't know, if you're not sure what your tasks are, I would invite you to take a couple of minutes or take a week and do the classic time management thing and write down every half an hour what you're doing, okay? So that you can figure out, where am I spending my time? If you don't really even know that, that would be the starting point for this. But once you have that, You look at the tasks and say, how hard is this to train? Some things are hard to train. I had a position in my organization called commodity manager, and I knew when I hired somebody, it was going to be 6 months before they would actually be effective on their own. They needed tons of support through that process, and I understood that's how long it was going to take before I could rely on them. So I had a process to get them to that 6 months, but I knew that was going to take. So you can rate your tasks. Is it easy or is it difficult? Now, how can you make some difficult things easier? I hinted at it earlier. Sometimes break the task down into subtasks and see if there's some things that can be given to somebody to take the load off you in the short term that are simple, like running a report or whatever that is. So then the next question to ask yourself is, if I got rid of this task, how much time would I free up? So again, you need to understand what you are working on. Because there's some things you could get rid of that are easy to get rid of, and maybe you should, just so it's not a mental distraction, that aren't going to give you much time. And then there's some things that are going to give you a lot of time freed. And so kind of thinking that through about which tasks might take off a load is another layer of evaluating what to delegate. The last thing is the risk question, which is, if I give this away, is there going to be a significant impact to, I'm going to call it quality, or financial risk? So is this going to affect my customer in a way I don't like? So the person that I was talking about that had the business that was growing rapidly, this was really their barrier, because their strategy was so based on how they were interacting with customers. They were really, really afraid of impacting that. And so that's why they were struggling, is they really didn't want to impact the quality. So once you understand then what is the risk of doing it, I think you should be able to identify a couple of tasks between what's easy or hard to train, how much time is this going to give me, and then what's the risk to the business. Once you understand those things, a few things should pop up and you're like, yeah, I can maybe hand this off to create the space. Make sense? Okay, now I recently wrote a book called Sweet Triumph. Somebody here has read it. Yeah, 2 people have read it. And in that book, I have a chapter in which one of the characters in the book, named Kyle Quest, who I based on my friend Kevin West, gives a lesson to the main character, Jordan, in the book. And this is the process that I talk about in the book. And I came up with this mostly because, again, I'm trying to get people to break it down, slow it down, and figure out how to solve the problem, because they're struggling. It just feels like this big, overwhelming thing. And so there is a process to delegating. And the first step of that process is, it's very simple. Does the person have the knowledge to do the job? Do they even understand how to do it? So if the answer is no, then obviously there's training there that you have to do. If the answer is yes, but there's some reason they're not taking it on, even though you're trying to give it to them, that requires a little more thought. And perhaps the person doesn't have the confidence to go ahead and do that. Now, it might be a little sexist, but I would say sometimes females tend to have a little more issue with this. They tend to know how to do things, but they're afraid to take the step forward. Sometimes it's because of their learned experience, right? So they have gone ahead and taken a step out and tried to delegate things, and your response to that has made them not want to do it again, okay? So you really need to think through, like, how am I interacting? People need what they call where it's a safe place to fail, right? So if somebody doesn't do things exactly like you want them when they're attempting to learn, and you jump on them with both feet, they're going to get passive, okay? So you just want to be cautious of that and be a little analytical. Do they know how, and are they confident to do it, right? If not, I said, everything's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to make them check those boxes. The second thing is, and Chris hinted at this with this question about what if it's like we're going a direction but we don't have specifics around that, is that people understand the plan. Where are we going as an organization, and how does what I'm doing fit in with that? Now, in his case, he's talking about some kind of grand plans because he's Chris White and that's how he rolls. But even in the payables example, having the person understand, hey, payables is about cash flow, right? And cash flow is really important so we can pay salaries. And understanding kind of why what they're doing has importance to the organization and why doing it well matters. So it's important that people know that. Plus, by the way, no one wants to come in and push buttons all day, right? Everyone wants to have significance. And every job has significance or you wouldn't spend time and effort doing it. And so I think connecting people to the significance of what they're doing is so critical to their well-being and to the well-being of your organization. Then they need to understand their role in the plan. So yes, cash flow is important to our business, and your job is to make sure that people pay us so that we can pay the bills. And by the way, we have to pay our bills in 30 days, and our customers pay us in 60. And so this is really critical, So having them understand exactly what you're expecting them to do and the results. So I said, how do you define what success is for what you're delegating? Very important. Make sense? The last part is actually a lot of times the hardest part. And that is actually giving the person the authority to do the job, right? Actually allowing them to take the steps and to have the freedom to fail a little bit. Again, you're monitoring that so that they can actually take over the responsibility for the task. So we often think, and I'm in a lot of businesses, so I see where this, people are so well-intentioned and they think that they're giving authority, but they don't see some of the actions that they're doing that undermine it. I'll give you a couple examples just to illuminate that. I have a client that has retail store chains and they have store managers for them. And when I started working with that company, the owner would say that the responsibility was the store managers for everything that went on there, employee morale and retention and customer service and all this kind of thing. And yet he would undermine their decisions. So they would decide to give a raise or not give a raise, or the store manager would decide that. But employees would approach the owner and then he might countermand the decision that they were making. And so that did a couple of things that is very interesting. We don't understand always the outcomes that come from our decisions. Well, one was the store managers got kind of passive, right? It's not mine, right? So they weren't really owning their stuff because they're like, well, this person is gonna decide. And second of all, the owner got really busy with people bothering him all the time. Why? Because that's where their raise came from. It wasn't from the guy that was watching them do what they were doing all day long. It was from, how do I suck up to the owner over here and give him a good impression when he's in the room? So he created this busyness for himself, and he's like, I'm so overwhelmed. Why are these people talking to me? Well, you trained him to do that, right? And so we don't often see some of these things that we do. Does anybody ever experience this one in action? In the book I write about, or Kevin talks about, or Kyle in the book talks about somebody promotes a sales manager and says, you have the responsibility to grow sales, and it's a female, and she comes up with new plans, new incentives and stuff, but then the salesmen don't like it, what she wants to do, and so they go to the owner, and then he says, well, you don't really have to do that. Well, what happened to that person? In the book, she quits and goes to the competitor. So we often think we're giving the authority, but we pull it back. And why do we do this? Because we want to control. So, I call this the empowerment model in the book. Empowerment is a funny word because it has the word power in it. So when you empower people, you give power away, power for them to decide, for them to take action based on what they think is the right thing to do. And you have to trust them in that. And so that leads me to the last part of it. This is really a two-way trust thing. Okay, they trust you not to rip the rug out from under them, not to jump on them with both feet if things don't go perfectly. I mean, when people are starting out a task, it's not going to go perfectly. There's a learning curve, right? They trust you to do that, and you trust them put their very best effort in. Now, you have to create a management system so that you're paying attention to what folks are doing, so you're not abandoning them, right? So they have a chance to be supported in what they're doing. But it's really all built around trust. So has anybody ever worked anywhere where this trust was not there? Okay, we see somebody nodding their head back here. Do you want to talk about that? Tell us the story. You don't have to, names can remain. No? Okay. Well, I certainly have. I can write a book about it, because why? Because I saw it, right? I see it at my clients, where it's not that anybody is ill-intentioned, and they think they're super trustworthy, but they're doing actions that don't understand how that's undermining trust. So, I didn't have anybody here said that they're having problems delegating, so this was going to be where I was going to say, like, can you diagnose where that might be falling apart based on what we learned? So since you're all doing it perfectly now, did anybody get a concept here that they were like, I see where that could be creating an issue? Does anybody have any one of those? Okay. Well, if you do feel like you have an issue, go back, ask yourself, do they know how to do this task? Sometimes they don't. Or they don't know how to do it the way, again, what we need to define as success, right? I've watched clients, I've told them, well, what did you tell them? You know, because they are not understanding what you're saying, right? Are they confident in themselves or in your reaction? Do they understand how this task fits into the plan and why it's important to be done the way it is? Do they understand what their role is, right? Have you given them the authority and really given it to them? And do they understand what their responsibility is? You know, you have to get specific sometimes. I expect to get a report on my desk once a month that tells me this. Or I expect output to be 35 hours a week, even when you're working from home. Or, you know, you need to be specific. Otherwise, you're just going to get what you get. Okay, questions? Yes.
So what if you delegate something to somebody and they're very qualified for it, you invest a lot of time in them, and they simply don't get it?
Wow, that's a tough one. And I have another one that'll go along with that, where we hire it and we think this person should just come in and know how to do things, and then they don't. and they're not meeting our expectation. So I think you know, I would like to draw something on the board here. These things work? Okay. Okay, so when that happens, the first thing you got to do is check yourself on clarity. So I haven't used that word today. It's one of my favorite words, because what I find is this is a lot of times where it falls apart. Does the person know exactly what you are looking for, right? Do they understand? Again, I keep talking about, what does success look like? So what is the output that you want, or attitude, behavior? Okay, are you telling them clearly? Because like I keep saying, I have clients, I tell them, and you know, and they're not doing it. What are you telling them? Okay, but you're saying, if you are clear, if you can check this box, I am very clear. They know exactly what they're supposed to do, right? That's the place to start. If they're not clear, you got to go fix that. The second thing is accountability. All right, and I'm hinting about that today too, because I keep talking about, you need a management system where you can go and see how are they performing. So you got to pay attention. And if you see gaps between, by the way, when you give them a task to do here, you need to get agreement, right? So you might be saying, go do this, and they're over there going, I ain't doing that, right? But if you need to get agreement from them, yes, I understand and I agree to do this, whatever you're asking me. So now you're paying attention. Am I getting the result that I asked for? So do you pay attention on a regular enough basis? that you know, like, here's the gap between what we agreed to do and what you're doing, and we can talk about that. By the way, it depersonalizes it too, because this isn't about you stink. This is about, hey, we agreed you're going to do this activity, and I see that it's not happening. What's going on with that, right? So that's the next step. Pay attention and give feedback. The last thing is support. So when we give people support, so people are going to come up with two things here of why there's a gap, okay? One is going to be a reason. Those are legitimate things. I don't have the training, I don't have the tool, I don't have the time, nobody told me, whatever. There's going to be reasons. So your job is when you hold them accountable to the gap, you pay attention, you listen to what they're saying. If there's a reason, you give them support. I train them, I get the tool, I give them time, or whatever it is. I give them support. The other thing is excuses. Excuses are basically, I'm just choosing not to do it, right? I'm getting to the answer to your question here. So if I'm clear, they agree, I pay attention, we talk about the gap, I listen to their reasons, I give them support to overcome the reason. So I go through this cycle, right? What's left? If I take care of every reason they have, what's left? Excuses. So at this point in time, you can clearly discern whether this person is capable or willing to do the job. And then it's easy to make a decision about whether they're the right guy, right? I think a lot of times we work in a community, and I think people in general, they want to do the right thing. They want to be fair, and they want to feel like they have done everything in their power to make people successful. But some people choose not to do the job. Right? But if you can kind of keep this in mind, am I clear? Do they understand? Am I helping them see the gap and overcome it? Am I taking care of the reasons that they can't do it? Then this becomes a lot less about being fair and nice. Make sense? What are you thinking after I told you that? Yeah, okay. I mean, I was wondering if you were thinking, oh, I see where it's not happening. Other questions? Okay. Talk too fast, I think. This is a lot, though. So there's going to be a video if you want to listen to some of the how do I break down the task thing. That was a lot to get if you weren't taking notes. There's going to be a video up that Tyler will put up there. You can contact me if there's areas that you feel like, hey, all my managers should hear this. I'll give you one of my cards, you can do that. And that's it. So thank you so much.
Excellent.
Oh.